Welcome back to Under Baobab Skies. Tonight, we listen to a story written not on pages, but on air. A story whose letters were beats, whose sentences were rhythms, whose paragraphs traveled farther and faster than any running messenger. We journey to the heartlands of the Kongo, where the forest is dense, the rivers are wide, and the hills have ears. But the most profound listener, the most agile traveler, was not a person or a bird. It was sound itself, the deep, resonant, talking sound of the drum. In the beginning, before the drum, there was the heartbeat, the steady, reassuring thump-thump at the core of every living thing. Then came the footfall, walking the earth, the handclap celebrating, the pestle-pounding grain in the mortar, a rhythm of sustenance. From these simple pulses, something magnificent was born. The understanding that rhythm could carry meaning, that you could send your voice on a journey of hide and wood, and it would arrive, clear and urgent, in a village a day's walk away. The drum became the land's nervous system. News of birth, death, marriage, danger, or celebration did not walk. It flew on skin and echo. But this voice was more than a practical tool. It was a thread in the fabric of a people's soul. A great drum, carved from a single ancient tree, was not an instrument. It was an elder. It was a library. It was said to hold within its hollow body the memory of every message that had ever passed through it, the collective breath of a century, stored in wood. To play, it was not to make music, but to consult history, to let the past speak again into the present. And when a shadow fell over the land, when new rulers came with chains, and laws that did not understand the forest's language, this voice became something else, a weapon of the spirit. They called it noise. They called it dangerous speech. They forbade it. But how do you forbid a heartbeat? How do you outlaw the rhythm of work, of cooking, of children playing? The voice of the drum did not die. It went underground. It hid in the slap of laundry on rocks, in the complex polyrhythm of three women pounding fufu, in the coded clapping games of children playing in the dust. Let's just pause for a moment. The fire crackles gently as the night breathes around us. In that crackle, you can hear a rhythm. In the distant insect hum, a melody is waiting to be understood. Tonight, we follow the path of this whispering voice. We will stand in a sun-scorched cane field where a work song holds a map to freedom. We will witness the birth of a mother drum, a tree transforming into a community's memory. We will feel the chill of a foreign law that tried to silence the hills. And we will marvel at the ingenuity that turned kitchen pots into telegraphs. Finally, we will sit in a quiet, modern laboratory where scholars listen, heads cocked, trying to crack a code that was never just a code, but a living, breathing way of being in the world. This is the story of a language that could outrun soldiers, cross rivers without boats, and hold a people's history safe in its vibrations. This is the story of resistance that sounded not like a shout, but like a heartbeat. A story of memory that lived not in ink, but in echo. So, get comfortable. Settle in by the fire with us. The story of the talking drum is about to begin. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories from under these skies. You are now under Baobab Skies. Imagine the sun, a merciless, white-hot coin pinned to a bleached sky. The air in the sugarcane field is a physical presence, thick with the cloying sweetness of crushed cane, the salt of sweat, and the dust of back-breaking labor. The soundscape is brutal, monotonous, the swish-thud of countless machetes, the grunts of effort, and the sharp, alien commands from an overseer. The rhythm of the work is relentless, mechanical, lift, swing, chop, drag. It's a rhythm of extraction, a rhythm of pure exhaustion. But listen closely. Within this prison of sound, another rhythm is being born, quiet and defiant. It begins with a single voice. His name is Kimbinga. His back is a roadmap of pain, a tapestry woven from old scars and new wounds. He lifts his machete, but as he brings it down, he doesn't grunt. He sings. It starts as a low, guttural hum, a sound you might mistake for simple strain. The notes are simple, a descending melody that follows the arc of his blade. The overseer, a distant figure seeking shade under a solitary palm, hears only what he expects to hear. A worker singing to ease his burden. A primitive, predictable thing. He hears the song, but he doesn't listen to the rhythm hidden between the notes. He doesn't understand the language being spoken right in front of him. Kimbinga's song holds a secret heartbeat. The melody itself follows the familiar, grinding beat of the work. But the emphasis, the tiny, almost imperceptible syncopation, does not. He stresses an offbeat, a sliver of time between the swish of the machete and the thud as it bites into the cane. Swish, thud, swish, thud. It's a slight hiccup in the expected flow. To the overseer, it's just a sign of fatigue, a tired man stumbling in his rhythm. But to the woman cutting cane 5 rows over, a woman named Ninzinga, it's a tap on the shoulder of her mind. Her ears, trained since birth on the complex, layered rhythms of her homeland, prick up. She doesn't look at him. That would be a fatal mistake. She keeps her head down, her body moving, her machete falling. But she is listening with her entire being. Then, the next verse of the song introduces a new element. A triplet 3 quick, soft notes squeezed into the space where 2 should be. Tot-tot-ta rest. Tot-tot rest. It's not just a musical flourish. It's the exact rhythm of a bird's alarm call in the deep forest back home. A warning, a call to attention, a signal to listen more closely. Nzinga hears it, and without missing a beat in her work, she subtly alters her own chopping rhythm. She creates a faint, answering pattern with the fall of her cane stalks. Thud, 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 a confirmation. I hear you, across the field, other ears, other hearts attuned to the old ways, catch the thread, a spark of connection. An invisible network flickers to life in the blinding, oppressive sun. The work song is no longer just a lament for a stolen life. It has become a curtain, and behind that curtain, a dangerous and hopeful conversation has just begun. Let's pause here for a moment. Imagine the scene. The work stops for a moment on the overseer's command. The air is suddenly heavy with silence, broken only by the drone of insects. But beneath that surface hum, a more purposeful, more human hum has taken root, a rhythm of rebellion, planted in the very heart of their oppression. Later that evening, in the cramped, suffocating darkness of the barracks, the real work begins. There are no words, not at first. Words can be overheard, twisted, and used against them. The work begins with hands. Kimbinga sits with a small, trusted group, their bodies aching from the day's labor. He begins to slap a rhythm on his own thigh. It's not a simple beat. It's a complex polyrhythm, a conversation between his 2 hands. One hand keeps the steady, dull beat of the work they just escaped. Thump, thump, thump. It's the sound of their prison, but the other hand, it dances. It flies across his thigh with a sharp, intricate pattern. Tapped, he plays it slowly, again and again, letting the pattern sink in. Then he whispers, his voice barely a breath in the crowded darkness. This, he says, tapping the intricate rhythm again, is the kapok tree, the big one by the dry riverbed. Its roots are above the ground, like walls. He wasn't just teaching them a signal. He was teaching them a map. The steady beat from his one hand was the path itself, the direction of their journey. The intricate taps from the other hand were the landmarks. 3 quick taps for the 3 large rocks they would have to pass. A pause for the fallen log that blocked the old path. A rolling pattern for the sharp bend in the dry river, and the final 2 strong slaps. That meant moon high, the time to run, when the moon reached the top of the sky. This rhythm was a compressed journey, a story told not in words, but in beats. To learn it was to burn the escape route into your mind, into your very muscles. They practiced on their own thighs, on the packed earth floor, on the straw of their sleeping mats. Their fingers, calloused and sore from the machetes, learned a new kind of work. They felt the pattern until it was etched into their muscle memory, deeper and more permanent than any scar, more potent than any fatigue. The rhythm became a part of them. The genius of this code was in its layers. It was a multi-stage system designed for survival. Out in the fields, the syncopated song was a simple, low-risk alert. It just meant prepare. Listen tonight for the map. It was a call to assembly for the mind, not the body. Then, the thigh-slapping practice in the barracks was the detailed instruction, the transmission of the vital, life-saving information. And the final execution, on the night of the escape, would be the pure, unadorned rhythm. It might be played on a stolen or hidden drum, or even mimicked by a nightbird call, carrying the simple, powerful command across the darkness. Go, go now. The plan was never written down. It was never fully spoken aloud. It was felt. It was a rhythm growing in the hidden spaces of their collective body. A powerful counterbeat to the oppressive, monotonous rhythm of their days. It was a pulse of hope, waiting for its moment to break free, to become the only sound that mattered in the world. The sound of freedom. The rhythm, once born, became a living creature in the dark. It passed from thigh to thigh, from heartbeat to heartbeat, not as a mere sequence of beats, but as a living landscape. Those who learned it did not simply memorize taps. They walked the journey in their minds every time they rehearsed it. The steady, underlying thump became the feel of the hard, packed earth under bare, cautious feet. The 3 quick taps were not just sounds. They were the 3 cool, moss-covered boulders they would crouch behind, catching their breath, the smell of damp stone in their nostrils. Nzinga became a key guardian of the rhythm. Her role was not to lead, but to confirm. In the field, she would be the one to initiate the response pattern when she heard Kimbinga's song shift. But at night, with the women in a separate shack, she took on a different task. She wove the rhythm into a lullaby. Holding a child, she would rock, and her pats on the child's back would be the kapok tree pattern, slow and gentle. To any listening guard, it was a mother soothing her baby. To the other women, it was a nightly rehearsal. The child, soothed by the familiar, rhythmic patting, would learn it in its bones before it learned words, a subconscious inheritance of resistance. The rhythm also evolved. It developed variations for different groups. For those working the far northern fields, the landmark taps were different to long slides for the red clay gully, a staccato burst for the thorn thicket. The core message, kapok tree, moon high, remained the same, but the paths were multiple, like roots from a single trunk. This was its strength. If one path was discovered, the others remained secret. The rhythm was a root system, not a single road. The danger of discovery was constant. One afternoon, a new overseer, younger and more nervous, heard Kimbinga singing, his ear untrained in Kongo music but suspicious of any deviation from monotony, strode over. "You, what is that noise? Sing properly or not at all." Kimbinga did not stop. He did not look up. He simply let his song become even more monotonous, flattening the syncopation, burying the code in a dull, drone-like hum. But his hands kept working, and in the swish-thud of his own machete, he reinserted the offbeat emphasis. It was now hidden not in his voice, but in the sound of his labor itself. The overseer, unsatisfied but hearing only the regular chop, moved on. The code had survived by migrating, by becoming even more fluid. Let's pause for a moment. The close call hangs in the humid air, a reminder that the code lives in the space between perception and reality. The final test came not from the overseers, but from within. An older man, Bimo, whose spirit had been broken by years of punishment, began to falter in his practice. His hands would stumble over the complex polyrhythm. In the darkness, his frustration turned to fear. "It is too much," he whispered one night. "My hands are old. They remember only the rhythm of the chain." Kimbinga moved close to him. He did not chastise. He took Bimo's hands in his own. Slowly, on the old man's palms, he tapped the rhythm. Not the full, intricate map, but the core of it. The steady walk, thump, thump, and the final destination beats thump thump for moon high. "Forget the landmarks," Father Kimbinga breathed. "Just remember the walk, and the tree at the end. Follow the sound of my drum, and you will find the way." This was the true essence of the code. It was not a rigid set of instructions for the individual, but a call to the collective. Those who could carried the full map. Those who could not needed only to trust and follow the sound. It was a rhythm of community, where the strong carried the details so the weak could follow the pulse. Bimo's hands steadied. He would not lead, but he would be able to answer the call. The rhythm, in its compassion, had made room for him too. The night of the chosen moon arrived. It was not a full moon, but a bright crescent, a sharp sliver of light that cast long, deep shadows perfect for hiding. The day's work had been normal, the songs seemingly mundane. But as dusk fell, a new tension threaded the air, electric and silent. It was not anxiety, but focus. A fierce, quiet focusing of will, like water gathering behind a dam. Every person who knew the rhythm felt it beating inside them. A second, secret heart ready to take over. They ate, they lay down, they waited. The only sound was the chorus of night insects and the distant, indifferent crash of the sea. They were waiting for a different sound to cut through the night. The sound of the map becoming a road. The moon climbed, a slow, deliberate ascension across the vast, ink-black sky. In the barracks, in the fields, in the hearts of hundreds, a silent tension coiled like a spring. Everyone watched the sky, not with hope, but with the grim patience of a hunter waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When the moon finally kissed the highest point of its arc, a perfect, luminous pearl pinned to the darkness, the signal came. But it didn't come from within the suffocating confines of the plantation compound. It came from the hills, from the free, dense forest that had been a tantalizing, untouchable line on the horizon for years. It began not with the familiar kapok tree rhythm, the secret tune practiced in whispers and soft taps on wooden beds. No, it began with its opposite, a long, single, deep note from a drum. A sound like a giant exhaling a breath held for a century. It was the sound of a door opening somewhere far away. Across the barracks, every held breath was released in a single, silent wave. This was it. This was real. Then, a cascade of calls, different drums, from different points in the hills, began speaking to each other across the miles. A rapid, high-pitched roll from the east was answered by a deeper, three-beat pattern from the north. This wasn't the secret escape code itself. This was the network awakening. It was the drummers coordinating, preparing, clearing the lines for the message that truly mattered. It was the sound of the outside world, a world of freedom they had only dreamed of, reaching in, a hand extended in the darkness to pull them out. The air itself seemed to vibrate with a new possibility. Then it came, clear, crisp, and impossibly loud in the still night air. It was the kapok tree rhythm. But this was not the tentative, muffled practice version. This was the master version, played on a proper hide-covered drum, played by a master's hands. The steady walk beat was a profound, resonant doom. Doom, doom that you didn't just hear with your ears. You felt it vibrating in your chest, in your bones. The intricate landmark taps were sharp, precise pack-a-tap sounds that danced around that deep heartbeat, painting a map in the air. And the final moon-high beats were two earth-shaking boom-booms that seemed to silence the very insects commanding the full attention of the night. Hearing it, full, loud, and in the open air, was a physical shock. It was the whispered idea made flesh. The secret hope had become a deafening, undeniable shout. It was a declaration of intent, a challenge hurled at the night. There was no mistaking it. The time was now. There was no need for spoken orders. No one shouted, "Go." As the last boom of the drum faded, a ghost of a vibration still hanging in the air, movement began in the dark. Silently, like shadows detaching from the walls, people rose from their sleeping mats. They had been ready for weeks. Small, hidden bundles were retrieved, a piece of dried fruit, a sharpened bit of scrap metal, a small gourd of water. They moved not as a panicked, clumsy crowd, but as separate rivulets of water, each knowing its course, all flowing toward a shared stream. Kimbinga, his heart a frantic drum in his own chest, went to the barracks door. He didn't look out into the compound, searching for guards. He knew that was a fool's errand. Instead, he simply listened. He let the sound be his eyes. The river repeated. The unmistakable doom. Doom, part-a-top, boom-boom. But this time, it came from a slightly different location, a few degrees further east. They weren't just giving the signal, they were navigating. The drums were a living compass, guiding them toward the specific, prearranged kapok tree, not just into the general, vast wilderness of the hills. The plantation's alarms finally erupted, but they were late, far too late. Shouts cut through the night, followed by the sharp, angry crack of a musket fired uselessly into the air. The jangle of keys and the clatter of chains sounded panicked, disorganized. The pursuers were confused, disoriented, because the drum calls, the very things that had signaled the escape, were now being used as a weapon of misdirection. A drum to the far north would suddenly sound a loud, insistent call. The guards and their dogs would turn, their attention drawn that way, crashing through the underbrush in a futile chase. But while they were distracted, the real group of escapees was slipping away to the southeast, following a softer, closer repetition of the guiding rhythm, played by a drummer hidden deep in a ravine. The drums were fighting a battle of sound, creating a sonic maze, a shield of pure rhythm to protect the fleeing. And Zinga, her small child tied securely to her back, found the rhythm in her own desperate flight. The steady thump-thump-thump of her bare feet hitting the hard-packed earth became the drum's deep walk-beat. Her own pounding heart, a frantic bird in her ribcage, played the rapid, intricate landmark taps. She wasn't just following the sound anymore. She had become the sound. The rhythm was in her blood, in her breath, in the powerful pump of her legs. She stumbled once, her foot catching on a gnarled root hidden in the darkness. For a terrifying second, the rhythm in her mind fragmented, the connection lost. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. But then, from just ahead, she heard it again, the clear, patient pattern. The drummer, sensing the group was struggling in the dense forest, was playing it slower now, drawing out the beats. It was a rhythmic lighthouse beam, cutting through the darkness, pulling her forward, reassuring her. She locked onto it, gritted her teeth, and ran. Let's just pause here for a moment, in the heart of the forest. The drum sound is both everywhere and nowhere at once. It's a benevolent ghost, a guardian spirit woven into the very fabric of the night, herding its people towards safety. It's a sound that has no physical form, yet it's more real and solid than the trees or the ground underfoot. It is the sound of pure, unadulterated freedom calling its children home. The final stage was the most dangerous. It was a stretch of open ground near a dry riverbed, the last terrifying hurdle before the sanctuary of the giant kapok tree's roots. And here the drums fell completely silent. The sudden absence of sound was more terrifying than any shout, any gunshot. The silence was a void. It meant they were exposed. It meant they were on their own for the last 100 paces. They had to trust the map they had memorized, the map that had been beaten into their minds for weeks. Kimbinga was at the head of one of the small groups. He peered through the darkness and saw it. The vast, silvery silhouette of the ancient kapok tree against the starry sky. Its great, sprawling above-ground roots were like the arms of a giant, forming natural chambers and hiding places. He took a breath and gave a low, specific bird call, the one they had practiced. The final, non-drum signal, the call of a nightjar. From the dark shadows of the roots, answering calls came back, and then figures emerged. They weren't the drummers, they were lookouts, guides from the free communities that lived deep in the hills. The maroon settlements, they had been waiting, ready to guide the newcomers the final, crucial part of the way, into the hidden interior of the forest. They had made it. Not all of them, no, but many. As the last exhausted stragglers were pulled into the tree's protective embrace, into the safety of the roots, a new drum message began to roll out from the high hills. This was not a rhythm of running or hiding. This was not a code. It was a slow, deep, rolling beat of arrival. A beat of homecoming. The drum language didn't deal in complex sentences or fleeting details. The rhythm didn't say, "They are safe now." It said something much more profound, something eternal. The rolling thunder of the drums announced, simply and powerfully, "The people have returned to the forest." This revolt hadn't been fought with stolen machetes or weapons grabbed from the manor house. It was fought with a rhythm, a seed of sound planted weeks before and harvested on a moon-high night. The victory wasn't marked by a bloody battle, but by a successful transmission. The message had been sent. The code had worked. The people had come home, far from the plantations, deep in the heart of the Kongo, where the old ways still breathed freely. A different kind of drum was coming into being. This was not a tool for secret messages or for warning of immediate danger. No, this was something more profound. This was a vessel for eternity. This was the mother drum. Its story began not with a carver's axe, but with a lightning strike. In a sacred grove near the village of Nsundi, a mighty muvuma tree, known to all as the listener, had stood for centuries. Its trunk was immense, wider than 10 men with their arms outstretched. Its vast canopy provided the shelter for the village council grounds, a place of wisdom and decision. One night, a storm of incredible, almost supernatural fury passed through the region. There was no rain, it was a storm of pure light and sound. Then a single, blinding bolt of lightning split the sky. It struck the listener cleanly, from its highest crown down to its roots, shearing off a great branch but leaving the main trunk miraculously unharmed. The next morning, the villagers gathered around it, not in fear, but in awe. They saw the massive, charred branch lying at its base and looked up at the untouched trunk. They knew this was a sign, but of what? The elder, a wise man named Tata Mello, approached the tree. He placed his palms flat against the bark, which was still warm from the lightning's kiss. He closed his eyes. He wasn't praying. He was listening. And then he felt it, a deep, resonant hum coming from within the wood, a vibration that had never been there before. The lightning hadn't killed the tree, it had tuned it. It had transformed the entire living giant into a silent, waiting instrument. The message was clear. The listener was ready to speak. It had chosen to transform, to give its body so that the village's collective memory could have a permanent, resonant home. But the decision to fell such a sacred being was not taken lightly. A full week of rituals followed. The people gathered at its base and told its stories, the oldest stories, of the village's founding, of the great migrations their ancestors had made, of the ancient covenants with the river and the forest. They were feeding the tree a final feast of memory before its great transformation. The day of the felling was a day of solemn celebration. The master carver, Nkosi, a man whose hands were said to understand the language of grain and sap, made the first cut. He did not use a common iron axe. Instead, he used a sacred adze, its blade made of polished stone, an ancient tool passed down through generations of his craft. As he began, the villagers sang a low, rhythmic dirge, a song of both mourning and honor. As the great tree fell, guided by ropes and the villagers' songs to lie perfectly along an east-west axis, there was no crash of destruction. Instead, a deep, groaning sigh seemed to rise from the earth itself. It was as if the tree was giving itself willingly. The real work then began. The process of preparing the log was slow and deliberate. The ends were sealed with clay and fire to cure the wood from the inside out, a process that took a full cycle of the moon. During this time, Nkosi did not touch the wood with his tools. He slept on a mat beside it, under the stars. He dreamed with it. In his dreams, he saw the drum's final form. It was not just a hollowed log, but a shape that flowed like a pregnant belly, then narrowed like a torso, with a top that opened like a calling mouth. He was receiving the drum's own blueprint from its spirit. Let's pause for a moment here. The log rests, curing in the sun and the rain, while its future voice gathers in the dreams of the carver and the hopes of the entire village. This isn't just about making an object. It's a co-creation between nature, spirit, and human hands. It's a testament to a worldview where everything is alive and has purpose. When the curing was finally complete, the hollowing began. This was the most sacred act of all. Nkosi worked from one end, carving a small opening. Then, using long-handled chisels and the careful application of burning coals, he slowly and painstakingly excavated the heartwood. It was not simply a matter of making a hole. He was shaping the interior chamber, what he called the drum's soul cavity. The contours of this inner space would determine its voice. A smooth, even chamber would produce a pure, clear tone. But Nkosi, guided by the visions from his dreams, carved subtle ridges and hollows inside. He was creating a complex interior geography. This, he explained to the apprentices who watched him in hushed reverence, was so the drum would have many voices. A ridge here would catch the sound and make it ripple like water. A hollow there would deepen the tone into the growl of thunder. The mother drum would not have one note. It would have a vocabulary. It would be capable of expressing the full range of human and natural experience. Each carve, each scrape, was a word being added to its language. The final step before stretching the animal hide over the opening was the implantation of memory objects. This was a profoundly moving ceremony. Into specific niches that Nkosi had carved within the chamber, the villagers came forward to place small, potent things. An elder's hand gently placed a bead from the necklace of the founding mother of the village. Another brought a flake of stone from the first forge where they learned to work metal. Someone else added a seed from the last great harvest before a devastating drought, a memory of both abundance and hardship. A tuft of hair from a beloved storyteller who had passed away but whose tales still lived was placed inside. These were not offerings or sacrifices. They were seeds of memory. They were the specific echoes that would now live inside the wood. When the drum was finally played, their essence would vibrate within the sound, coloring it with history, with joy, with sorrow, with the very spirit of the people. The tree that had listened silently for centuries was now being filled with everything it had heard. It was becoming a living archive of vibration, a library of sound. Its transformation was nearly complete. It was ready to find its voice and speak for generations to come. With the drum's soul cavity carved and seeded with memory, Nkosi turned his attention to its skin, the exterior. This was not decoration, it was scripture. The adze in his hand became a pen, a tool of profound communication. The patterns he would carve were not arbitrary whims of an artist. They were the visual counterpart to the sounds the drum would hold within. They were a map of its purpose, a history of its making, and a set of instructions for its use, written in a language of symbol and groove. A language older than any spoken word in the village. This was the drum's body, and it would tell a story even before a single note was played. He began at what would be the drum's base, the end that would touch the earth, grounding it in the physical world. Here, with slow, deliberate strokes, he carved a series of concentric circles, deep and unbroken. This was the Nsanga symbol, the whirlpool, representing the village's very origin, the spiral of life emerging from the watery chaos at the beginning of time. It was a powerful foundation, connecting the drum's future voice to the foundational, creative energy of the world itself. It was an anchor to the source of all things. Above this, his adze began to trace a meandering, double line that looped and curved around the drum's circumference. This was the Nkadi, the path of the river, the lifeblood of their home, but it was also a metaphor for the path of lineage, the unbroken flow of generations from the first ancestors all the way to the children who were yet to be born. It was a visual echo of the river that gave the village its life and its name, a constant reminder of the flow of time and the connection that binds them all together as one people, moving upward toward the drum's heart. The patterns became more narrative, telling the story of the village's values and identity. In a wide band that encircled the middle, he carved a sequence of interlocking shapes, each one a pillar of their society. He carved the sharp angles of a mountain peak, the symbol Ngoma, representing strength, resilience, and endurance against all hardship. He carved the round, full shape of a fruit, Babuta, a symbol of abundance, of the earth's generosity, and the importance of community and sharing. And he carved the elegant, tense curve of a bow, Mvula, signifying the skill of the hunt, the duty of protection, and the readiness to defend their way of life. These weren't just pictures of things. They were the core tenets of the village's identity. To read this band was to understand what the village valued, what it asked its drum to remember, and what power it asked it to project into the world. The most intricate and sacred work, however, was reserved for the area around the drum's mouth, the wide opening over which the hide would one day be stretched. Here, with the utmost care and reverence, Nkosi carved a ring of faces. These were not portraits of specific individuals, not of chiefs or heroes whose names might be forgotten. They were archetypes, the eternal spirits of the community. He carved the face of the wise elder, eyes closed in deep knowing, a vessel of memory and counsel. He carved the face of the nurturing mother, her lips parted in a soft, eternal song of care and creation. He carved the face of the courageous hunter, his gaze focused and fierce, a picture of determination and provision. And he carved the face of the playful child, caught in a moment of pure, unbridled smile, representing joy and the future. These faces were the voices the drum would eventually channel. They were the choir waiting for their conductor. When the drum would be played for council meetings, it would speak with the elders' measured wisdom. When it was played to celebrate the harvest, it would sing with the mother's boundless joy. When a great hunt was called, it would beat with the hunter's fierce heart. The drum was not a soloist. It was the embodiment of the entire community, a vessel for every aspect of their collective soul, waiting to be brought to life. Let's just pause for a moment and listen. The rhythm of Nkos's adze is its own kind of music. That sharp, percussive tock-tock of steel on wood is a song in itself. It's a sound that answers the bird calls from the deep forest, creating a conversation between human creation and the vibrant life of the natural world that surrounds them. It's a dialogue of respect, of give and take. As he carved, Nkosi did not work in silence. He hummed. He hummed the oldest songs he knew, melodies that had been passed down through countless generations. He hummed the song for calling the rain during a drought, the solemn song for remembering the dead and guiding their spirits home, the joyous song for celebrating the birth of a firstborn child. The apprentices, watching with rapt attention, held a belief that was as solid as the wood itself. They believed the vibrations of these ancient songs traveled from Nkos's chest, down his arms, through the adze handle, and directly into the wood, embedding the very essence of the melodies into the grain. The drum was being tuned not just by its physical shape, but by pure, focused intention. Each stroke of the adze was a word in a long, whispered prayer. Finally, when the last symbol was carved, the exterior was smoothed. This was done with river stones, chosen for their smoothness and density. The stones were heated in a fire until they were almost glowing, then gripped in thick pads of leaves and rubbed vigorously against the wood. This process, called kukondila, did more than just polish the surface. The intense heat sealed the carvings, pressing the symbols deep into the drum's consciousness, making them a permanent part of its being. It also gave the wood a warm, dark patina, a rich luster that seemed to drink the sunlight and hold it within. When it was done, the drum log no longer looked like a fallen tree. It looked like a sleeping deity, pregnant with sound, its body covered in the sacred text of its people, waiting for the moment of its awakening. The last physical act of creation was the selection and preparation of the hide. This was a task of equal spiritual importance. The hide could not come from a domesticated animal, from a creature of the village. A hunt was organized, not for food, but for this specific, sacred purpose. A strong, mature forest antelope was chosen and taken, and prayers of thanks and respect were offered for its sacrifice, acknowledging the life that was given so the drum could have a voice. The hide was tanned not with harsh, foreign chemicals, but with the brains and fat of the animal itself, a method that ensures nothing is wasted and honors the creature's spirit. Tannin from specific tree barks was used, a process that kept the skin spiritually connected to the forest it came from. For days, it was stretched, scraped, and smoked over a cool, fragrant fire until it became a perfect, responsive membrane. This hide was to be the drum's ear and its tongue the sensitive surface that would listen to the beater's touch and give thunderous voice to the hollow's deep memory. And so, the drum was now complete in its physical form. A great, sculpted body of wood covered in sacred symbols and a taut, waiting skin of forest life. But it was still silent. It was a library without a reader, an archive without a key, a heart that had not yet begun to beat. The final, most important step remained, the awakening, the ceremony that would breathe life into the wood and hide, and transform it from a beautiful object into a living, breathing voice for the entire village. The awakening of the mother drum was not a ceremony of dedication. It was a birth. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep violet, the entire village gathered at the edge of the sacred grove. The air was thick with anticipation, a silence that hummed with unasked questions. In the center of the clearing, placed upon a mound of soft, red clay, sat the drum. It was immense, its new hide stretched taut and laced tightly over its great mouth. It wasn't treated as an object, a mere instrument. It was revered as a newborn elder, a vessel of immense potential. Tata and Bello, the village's wise elder, stood before it. The flames of a central fire danced across his weathered face, casting long shadows that seemed to listen alongside the people. He held no drumstick, no beater. In his hand was a small gourd rattle filled with seeds from the original Movema tree, the very ancestor of the wood that formed the drum. He began to speak, his voice low and resonant, directed not at the crowd, but at the silent giant before him. "You were the listener," he said, his words a solemn prayer. "You heard the wind sighing through our thatch roofs. You heard the laughter of our children echoing in the dust. You heard the heated arguments of our councils and the quiet tears at our burials. You heard the lightning speak your new name, searing it into your very heartwood. Now you must become the speaker. You must give back all that you have absorbed, but not as noise. You must give it back as memory." With these words, Tatamello began to shake the rattle. It was a slow, scattering rhythm, like seeds being sown on the wind. He circled the drum, casting the sound seeds into the air around it, a gentle call to attention, an invitation to awaken. Then the oldest woman in the village, Mama Keys, stepped forward from the silent crowd. Her movements were deliberate, filled with the grace of her many years. She carried a clay pot filled with cool water from the village spring, the source of their life. Slowly, she too circled the drum. She dipped her fingers into the water and let droplets fall onto the taut, pale hide, plink, plink. Each drop made a tiny, dull thud, a sound barely audible yet profoundly significant. "We give you the first voice," she whispered, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "The voice of the source, the voice of life." The water was meant to connect the drum to the river's path carved upon its side, a physical reminder that all sound, like all life, flows from a single source and follows a winding path. Next, the beaters were brought forth. They were laid reverently on a woven mat before the drum. There were not one, but four, each tied together with a single vine, representing the four voices the drum could speak. One was of hard Ansafu wood, 4 sharp, high notes that could cut through the night. Another was wrapped in soft raffia, designed for muted, deep tones that spoke from the earth. A third was tipped with a ball of dried gum for a booming slap that could stir the heart. And the last was of simple, smooth kola wood for the clear, fundamental beat, the steady pulse of the village. The honor of the first strike was given to Nkosi, the carver. It was his hands that had read the story in the Movema wood, his skill that had given it this new form. The crowd held its breath as he approached, but Nkosi did not reach for a beater. Instead, he knelt down. He placed his ear against the drum's side, pressing it gently against the carved face of the wise elder that adorned the wood. He closed his eyes, his face a mask of intense concentration, listening. He remained there for a long time, so long that the crickets began their evening song. The entire village was utterly silent, a collective held breath. Then his eyes opened. A flicker of understanding passed across his face. He rose slowly and reached for the mat. He didn't choose the hard Nsafu beater for a sharp crack, nor the gum-tipped one for a mighty boom. His hand went to the softest of them all, the beater wrapped in thick raffia. He stood, feet planted firmly on the earth, and raised the beater high. For a moment he was a statue silhouetted against the fire. Then his arm came down in a single, fluid motion. He struck the very center of the hide with a soft, deep blow. Duma, the sound was not loud. It was immense. It didn't feel like it came from the drum, but from the ground itself, rising up through the soles of every person's feet, vibrating in their bones. It was a sound of profound depth, a note that seemed to contain the quiet of the forest floor and the weight of a mountain. And it did not stop quickly. It lingered, a tangible presence in the air, humming in the chest, fading with the slowness of a giant creature settling back to sleep. And as the great note finally began to decay, something extraordinary happened. Those standing closest swore they heard it. Woven into the fading vibration, like a ghost in the machine, was a faint, complex echo of many voices talking at once. It was the unmistakable sound of the village square at midday, a memory of life and chatter captured within the wood, and now, for the first time, released. The fire seemed to burn a little lower, as if, in respect, a new presence had entered the world. Tata Mabello nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. "It remembers," he whispered to the night. He then took the hard Ensafu beater. He didn't strike the center. He rapped the very edge of the hide. A sharp, quick strike, tack. The sound was bright, urgent, like a sudden warning. And within that sharp crack, some of the elders swore they heard the faint, ghostly sizzle of lightning, an echo of the storm that had felled the tree and given it its new purpose. Next, Mama Keys took her turn. She chose the gum-tipped beater and struck a rolling, familiar rhythm. Boom-dob-boom. It was the rhythm of women grinding grain, a beat as old as the village itself. As the pattern filled the air, the older women gasped. A look of joyful surprise spread across their faces. They said they could smell the scent of fresh flour on the breeze, could feel the satisfying ache in their shoulders from a good day's work. The drum wasn't just making sound, it was triggering memory through synesthesia. Sound was becoming smell, becoming feeling. This was the miracle of the mother drum. It was believed that the unique combination of the lightning-tuned wood, the intentional carvings on the inside that told the village's story, and the memory objects sealed within it had created a perfect resonator for their collective experience. The drum did not invent, it recalled. To play a rhythm of mourning was to release the stored echoes of all past grief, allowing the community to grieve anew, but this time in communion with all who had come before them. To play a rhythm of celebration was to literally dance with the ghosts of every previous festival, to feel their joy layered upon your own. The drum was named Ngoma Nenetha, Great Vessel. That night it was played for hours. Different hands took their turn, with different beaters, exploring its voice. A young warrior played a frantic rhythm, and people felt a surge of adrenaline, the phantom memory of a hunt. A new mother played a soft, rocking beat, and a sense of profound peace settled over the clearing. Each combination of rhythm, beater, and player produced a different texture of memory. This was not a performance for entertainment. It was an act of communal remembering, of reinforcing their identity, of bathing in the sonic history of who they were. The drum was alive. It was a speaker for the ancestors, a historian carved from wood and stretched with hide, a heart that beat with the accumulated rhythm of time itself. Its first and most important duty was not to send messages to distant villages, but to hold this village close, to wrap it in the sound of its own past, and to remind them, in the deepest possible way, of who they were, where they came from, and who they would become together. For generations, the true heartbeat of the Kongo wasn't something you could see, but something you could feel, something you could hear, rolling across the hills and echoing through the valleys. It was the voice of Ngoma Nene, the great drum, and the 1,000 other drums that spoke a language older than any king or kingdom. They were the pulse of news, the rhythm of law, the very melody of memory. The drums announced births with joy, mourned deaths with solemn respect, called for celebrations, and warned of dangers. They were the invisible threads that wove countless villages into one vast, interconnected community, a living, breathing tapestry of sound. But a new power had been steadily creeping inland, solidifying its grip along the coasts and rivers. This power came on ships, with guns and strange flags, and it had a different understanding of the world. It was a power that did not hear language in the thrumming of the drums. To them, it was just noise. Worse, it was a noise they couldn't control, a language they couldn't understand, and therefore a threat. Anything this new power could not understand, it sought to silence. The decree didn't arrive on a drumbeat, carried on the wind from a friendly village. It arrived on a piece of paper. It was carried by a nervous colonial administrator in a stiff, uncomfortable uniform, and read aloud by a local translator whose voice trembled with the shame of the words he was forced to speak. The message was short, blunt, and chilling in its simplicity. By order of the colonial authority, the beating of drums, the blowing of horns, or the making of any concerted signal sound across distances is hereby prohibited. Such sounds are deemed instruments of sedition and rebellion. Any person found in violation will be subject to imprisonment and the instrument destroyed. The words hung in the air, heavy and alien. In the village of Ensundi, home to the revered Enjamaneni, the elders gathered around the great drum. Tata Mabelo, so ancient his skin was like a map of the land itself, placed a trembling hand on its cool, intricately carved surface. Just days before, this same drum had thrummed with the joyous rhythms of a wedding, its voice full of life and promise. Now it sat silent, a giant, mute question mark in the center of their world. They fear what they cannot control, Tata Ambello said, his voice thin as a dry leaf, but carried on a current of unshakable clarity. They can block a road, they can lock a man in a box, they can burn a house, but how do you cage a sound? They do not know, so they forbid it. They think a law written on paper is stronger than a rhythm that lives in the blood. Across the Kongo, the first reaction was disbelief. How could you ban drums? It was like banning laughter or tears. The drums weren't just for sending long-distance messages. They were the punctuation marks of daily life. Their rhythms woke the village in the morning, called people from the fields at midday, lulled children to sleep at night. They were the score to which life was lived. Banning them felt as absurd, as impossible, as banning breath itself. Inevitably, defiance flickered. In some villages, as dusk settled and the air grew cool, young men, their hearts full of fire and indignation, brought out their small hand drums. They played not in rebellion, but in a desperate attempt to feel normal, to hear the familiar sounds that told them they were home. The consequences were swift and brutal. Colonial soldiers would descend upon the village, their faces grim. They would seize the small, beautifully carved drums, throw them into the center of the village square, and smash them to splinters with the butts of their rifles. The young men who had played them would be dragged away, their wrists bound tightly. The message was hammered home with every splintered piece of wood. This new law was not an empty threat. The soundscape of an entire culture was being forcibly erased. A new law was being imposed, not just of the land, but of the very air. Silence, the punishment was harsh, but the true injury, the deeper wound, was not the smashed drums or the imprisoned men. It was the cultural severing. The silence that followed was not peaceful, it was hollow. A death in a distant village now went unannounced. The network of shared mourning, of relatives traveling to offer support and grieve together, was broken. A call for a collective hunt, a vital practice for ensuring the community had enough to eat, could no longer be sent across the hills, weakening food security for everyone. Think about the intricate, layered conversations that had once danced between the hill-strayed negotiations tapped out in complex codes. Philosophical debates shared through rhythmic proverbs, warnings and congratulations flowing freely. All of it fell silent. The land, once so vibrant with this living, sonic tapestry, grew acoustically still. And in that stillness, a profound and terrible loneliness began to set in. Each village, once a node in a vast, pulsating network, became an isolated island in a quiet sea. The colonial power hadn't just banned an instrument, they had performed a surgery, cutting a vital organ from the social and spiritual body of the Kongo people. Let's just pause for a moment and really feel the weight of that. This new silence is heavy, it's unnatural. It's the silence of a bird whose song has been stolen, the silence of a flowing river that has been dammed. It's the sound of connection being lost, the sound of a voice being choked. Back in Nsindi, the elders faced a terrible choice. To play Ngoma Nene, their mother drum, the keeper of their history, was to risk its certain destruction. They had seen what happened to the smaller drums. The soldiers would show no reverence for this sacred object. They would see it only as a symbol of defiance and smash it into firewood. To lose Ngoma Nene would be like having their library burned, their archive destroyed, their memory erased. But to not play it, to let it sit in perpetual silence, felt like a slower, more insidious kind of death by forgetting. They refused both paths. They chose a third way, preservation through apparent silence. Under the cover of a moonless night, a secret ceremony was held. They brought out Ngoma Nene one last time, not to play it, but to prepare it. They anointed the great drum with special oils, chanting prayers for its safekeeping. They wrapped it carefully in layer upon layer of treated bark cloth, a protective cocoon against the damp and the insects. Then, inside Tata Mello's own hut, they lowered the great drum into a deep, dry pit they had dug in the earth floor. They didn't lay it on its side, but buried it, standing upright, as if they were not burying the dead, but planting a seed. A seed of sound, a seed of memory, a seed of hope. As the last of the soil was patted down, smoothing the floor of the hut and hiding all traces of their work, Mama Keys, a village matriarch, whispered to the earth that now covered their most precious voice. "We are not hiding you," she murmured. "We are putting you to sleep. We are making you a memory, so that you may one day wake." And so, the greatest voice in the land was made invisible. Its powerful mouth, filled with soil, put into a long slumber, waiting patiently for a future spring when it could thunder once more. The law against vibration was in full force. The colonial authorities patrolled a land that was, to their ears, finally quiet, finally orderly. The drums were silent, but the people who had spoken through them for centuries were not. The human spirit is not so icily muted. They had been forced to stop speaking in one language, but that did not mean they had forgotten how to communicate. They listened to the new, imposed silence, and in that vast emptiness, they began to hear other possibilities. They began to listen to the world in a new way. If the drum's voice was now forbidden, then perhaps, just perhaps, they could teach the world itself to drum. The rhythm was still in their blood, and they would find a new way to let it out. The colonizers believed they had one. By outlawing the Njama, the great drums of the Congo, they thought they had severed the lines of communication, rendering the people isolated and mute. They had banned the deep boom that carried news and spirit across the valleys. The silence that followed was, to them, the sound of compliance, of a culture subdued. But they were deaf. They were deaf to the language of life itself. The silence didn't last. It was soon filled, not with the familiar thunder of the drums, but with the subtle, intricate rhythms of survival. In Congo culture, There was no clean line separating music from work or work from speech. Every action held a rhythm, and every rhythm could carry a world of meaning. The colonizers, with their rigid categories, couldn't comprehend this. They had silenced what they recognized as a threat, but they were oblivious to the symphony of resistance that rose in its place. The first note in this new symphony came from a place they would never think to look. The kitchen. The first new drum was the mortar and pestle. Every morning, as the sun climbed into the sky, the women of the village would gather. It was a scene repeated across the land, a timeless ritual of preparing the day's food. They pounded fufu, cassava, or grain, their heavy wooden pestles rising and falling in a steady, powerful motion. The deep, resonant thud of a pestle hitting the bottom of a mortar was to a passing soldier just the sound of work. Mundane, unthreatening, but for the women, under the quiet guidance of elders like Mama Keys, this daily chore became an act of defiance. One woman pounding was just noise, but 2, 3, or 4 women pounding in unison could weave a complex tapestry of sound. They developed a code, a language hidden within the polyrhythms of food preparation, a specific sequence of beats. Thud, 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 a brief pause, then a sharp thud, thud. To the untrained ear, it was just the rhythm of pounding grain. To everyone in the village, it was a clear and urgent message. Soldiers are on the path from the east. This warning, born from the very act of making a meal, would travel from one compound to the next, faster than any soldier could march. The sound was relentless. It was necessary, and because it was tied to the essential task of cooking, it was completely invisible to the authorities. A colonial patrol might walk right through a village, hearing only the comforting sounds of daily life, utterly unaware that their every move was being broadcast and tracked by the very women they ignored. The men, too, found their own instruments in the tools of their labor. The forest and the clearing became their concert halls. The sharp, rhythmic thwack of an axe, felling a tree, or splitting firewood was another perfect medium for communication. 2 men, working on opposite sides of a clearing, could send simple, effective signals across the distance. 3 quick chops, a pause, then 2 slow, deliberate ones. It was a simple message. All clear. The coast was safe. But a frantic, uneven rhythm, a chaotic flurry of chops, was a sign of immediate danger. Trouble here. Even the seemingly gentle sounds of craft had a voice. The rhythmic shush-clack of a loom, as women wove intricate patterns into cloth, was used to pass more nuanced, almost conversational news between households. Who was sick? Who had received a letter from a relative in a distant town, where you could find a good trade for yams. Gossip, news, and warnings, all woven into the fabric of their lives and their textiles. But perhaps the most ingenious adaptation of all was found in the laughter and games of children. To the colonial eye, children were harmless. Their games were just meaningless noise, their rhymes simple diversions. The elders of the village, however, saw something else entirely. They saw a perfect, unsuspected network, a channel of communication that no one would ever think to monitor. They began to teach the children new games, subtly altering the old ones. They introduced new clapping rhymes, new songs for skipping rope. The complex, lightning-fast hand-clap patterns of a game called Onsu, the little bird, were modified to contain the basic rhythmic structure of the old drum message for all clear. A child's skipping song, its cadence, usually steady and predictable, could be sung with a slight, almost imperceptible stutter on a specific word. That tiny change could indicate that a particular person, a notoriously strict tax collector, a missionary, or a specific colonial official, was approaching the village. The children, lost in their play, became the eyes and ears of the community. their joyful noise a shield of secrets. Let's just pause for a moment and listen. Imagine standing in the center of one of these villages. The air is thick with sound. You hear the deep thud of mortar, the sharp crack of axes, the steady clack of a loom, the high-pitched laughter and singing of children playing. It is the sound of life, vibrant and ongoing. But if you knew the code, if you could hear the language within the noise, you would understand that you are standing in the middle of a massive, clandestine communication network. Layered within the sounds of the everyday is a secret, resilient pulse, a heartbeat the law could never find, let alone silence. This system of communication became so deeply ingrained in daily life that it started to operate on a subconscious level. It was a language you didn't just speak, but one you lived. A mother, busy with her own chores, might hear a particular rhythm of pounding from her neighbor's yard and, without even consciously thinking about it, know to keep her children close to home that afternoon. A hunter, returning from the forest, would listen for the pattern of axe blows from the edge of the village. The rhythm would tell him whether to bring his game directly home or to hide it in the brush and approach with caution. The colonial ban had sought to make the people mute, to take away their voice. Instead, it had made them poets of the everyday. It had forced them to distill their powerful language of drums into an even more subtle, more integrated, and more beautiful form of communication. The entire village had become a living, breathing instrument. Its music was the sound of survival, and its lyrics were the secrets of community and caution. This sonic resistance had an unexpected and profound side effect. Because this new language was embedded in essential, communal tasks, it dramatically strengthened the bonds within the community. Cooking, farming, building, and even playing were no longer just individual chores or family duties. They became acts of participation in a collective intelligence, a shared secret that bound everyone together. Every woman at the mortar, every man with an axe, every child in a clapping circle was a guardian of the code. They were each a living cell in the village's nervous system, all interconnected, all listening, all speaking. The attempt to divide and conquer, to silence and control, had backfired spectacularly. Paradoxically, it had made the people more intimately connected, more musically sophisticated in their daily lives, and more united than ever before. They had not lost their voice. They had simply learned to sing with their hands, with their tools, with their work, with their entire being. They had learned to live the music. Years passed under the weight of the ban. An entire generation grew up having never heard the open, commanding voice of Njuema Neni shake the hills. They were born into a world where the great drum was just a whispered story, a ghost of a sound. But, while they couldn't speak the language of the drum, they became fluent in others. They spoke the language of the pestle-pounding grain, the rhythmic thud of the axe-splitting wood, and the intricate patterns of clapping hands during games and gatherings. The colonial authorities, listening from their administrative posts, heard only the sounds of labor and domestic life. They were satisfied. They heard no war drums, no obvious calls to rebellion. They saw a pacified population, efficiently working, their spirits seemingly broken. They believed they had succeeded, that by silencing the drum, they had silenced the people. But the silence they perceived was an illusion. It was a silence filled with such dense, intentional sound that it had become a new kind of loudness, a language they were deaf to. The code, once used for practical warnings, evolved. It began to carry history, to weave the past into the present. Elders, their hands gnarled but nimble, would plait ropes or weave baskets with a steady, repetitive motion. As they worked, they would teach the old stories, the great epics of their people. The rhythm of their fingers, the push and pull, the tap and slide, would mimic the lost drum patterns that once told those very tales. A child sitting at their grandparents' feet, learning to weave wasn't just learning a craft. They were learning the story of the Great Flood, not just through words, but through the tap-tap slide of the weaving sorda rhythm that was the story's sonic fingerprint, embedded directly into their muscle memory. The memory of the drums also found a new home in song. Work songs, a part of life since time immemorial, now took on a new, layered significance. A song about paddling a canoe down the great river might have a simple, wandering melody that the colonizers found quaint and primitive. But for the people, the true meaning was in the rhythm. The stress on certain syllables, timed with the dip of the paddles into the water, could recount the entire journey of a famous ancestor, a secret history hidden in plain sight. They heard pretty, simple tunes. The people heard epic poems, encoded in stress and tempo. The human voice, the original instrument, became the new drum, carrying the old, forbidden rhythms in its very cadence. And then, in the ultimate act of defiance, they began to reclaim the sounds of their oppressors. The missionaries had introduced church bells, a metallic, regimented, foreign sound designed to impose a new sense of time, a new spiritual authority. It was meant to mark the hours of prayer and work according to a colonial clock. The people adopted the bells. They went to the churches, but they listened differently. They learned that the way the bell ringer pulled the rope could carry a message, a slight hesitation between rings, a quick double strike on the third-hour writ could be a signal, a warning, a piece of news. Even within the rigid, imposed sonic order of the colonizer, they found a seam, a tiny crack where they could weave their own thread of meaning. The very tool of control became another instrument in their hidden orchestra. Let's just pause here for a moment and listen. Imagine the air, thick with unspoken language. Every sound has a shadow, a possible second meaning. The pounding of a hammer, the call of a bird, the laughter of children. It's a world alive with listening, where every ear is trained to hear the message beneath the noise. It's a state of constant, subtle awareness. The ban, which was intended to sever communication and impose absolute control, had failed in the most spectacular way. It hadn't destroyed their network. It had forced it to mutate, to evolve, to become stronger, more resilient, and more deeply embedded in the very fabric of life itself. Think about it. The drum had been a specialized tool, a powerful but singular voice for speaking across distance. This new language, however, was omnipresent. It was woven into the very act of existing together as a community. You couldn't confiscate it, you couldn't smash it. How do you outlaw the rhythm of a woman pounding yams for her family's dinner? How do you ban the patterns in a children's clapping game? How do you police the swing of an axe or the lilt of a sung phrase? The language was in their muscles, in their breath, in their daily survival. It was everywhere and nowhere at once. And so, the years continued to turn. The colonial era, which had seemed so permanent, so absolute, eventually began to wane. Its power frayed at the edges. Its laws and edicts losing their grip, becoming forgotten relics of a fading authority. When the time was right, when the air felt free again, the people went to the old, now weathered hut of Tatamelo. They dug. Beneath the packed earth floor, they unearthed Ngoma, Nene, the great vessel. They carefully cleaned the carved wood, polished its surfaces, and stretched a new, taut hide across its mouth. A great celebration was prepared. Then a hush fell over the village as the drummer raised his hands. The first deep, resonant boom of Ngoma Nene echoed across the hills for the first time in a generation. It was a sound of return, of memory, of triumph. But something remarkable happened. Its voice was not the only voice in the land. It was not a solo performance. As the great drum spoke, it was joined by the symphony that had grown in its long absence. The pestles in the mortar picked up the beat. The axes chopping wood fell in perfect time, the weavers' shuttles danced to the rhythm, and the voices of the people, singing their layered songs, rose to meet the drum's call. The great vessel was no longer the sole keeper of memory. It was now the deep, resonant bass note in a much richer, more complex, more beautiful harmony. The attempt to impose silence had inadvertently taught them a profound lesson. That their true voice was not in any single instrument, no matter how sacred. Their true, unconquerable voice was in the rhythm of their collective life. The silent language had grown so vast and so intricate that it had become, and would forever remain, ungovernable. A century after the drums fell silent in a soundproof room at a European university, a different kind of listening was taking place. Dr. Althea Mensah, a brilliant linguist of Ghanaian descent, sat with high-quality headphones clamped over her ears. On her screen, a green waveform pulsed and flickered. It was from an old crackly field recording made back in the 1930s, labeled simply Kongo Work Song Cassava Pounding for Weeks. She had been immersed in these ghosts of sound, meticulously analyzing dozens of similar recordings from the colonial era. Her initial goal was straightforward: to isolate the spoken words from the hiss, crackle, and noise of the past. It was a painstaking process of digital archaeology, filtering and enhancing, trying to catch the faint echoes of voices long gone. But today, something shifted. She found herself not listening to the words, but to something else entirely. She was listening to the pounding. She had noticed something strange, something that felt deliberate. The strikes of the heavy wooden pestles against the cassava in the mortar weren't random. They weren't just the chaotic sounds of labor. They formed a consistent, repeating pattern of accents. A strong beat, then two weak ones, then another strong one. A short pause, then a weak beat, a strong one, and another weak one. Strong, weak, strong, pause, weak, strong, weak. It was a rhythm. Intrigued, she leaned closer to her monitor. With a few clicks, she applied a digital filter, gently carving away the women's singing voices, isolating the percussive heart of the recording. She was left with only the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of the pestles. She looped the isolated rhythm, letting it play over and over. There was no doubt. This wasn't just a work rhythm. It was a polyrhythm, complex and clearly intentional. It was music. On a whim, an academic spark of curiosity, she turned to another window on her computer. It was a database of documented Kongo drum rhythms from the pre-colonial era, painstakingly transcribed by early ethnographies, those few who saw value and complexity where others saw only primitive noise. She scrolled through the complex notations, searching for a match. And then she found it. Her heart began to pound in time with the crackling recording from the past. There, on her screen, was a rhythm named Nkolo. The notation was a near-perfect match to the cassava pounding pattern. Her eyes widened. She knew what Nkolo meant. In the Kongo language, it meant chief, or more broadly, important message. The Nkolo rhythm was traditionally played on drums to announce the arrival of a dignitary, or to call people to an urgent council meeting. It was a sound of significance, a call to attention. But that raised a perplexing question. Why was this specific, important drum rhythm being played by women pounding cassava in a village in the 1930s? This was decades after the colonial authorities had imposed their infamous drum bans, silencing the very instruments that had carried these messages for centuries. The drums were gone, so why did the rhythm remain hidden in the most mundane of daily chores? A thought struck her, a sudden, electrifying connection. The eureka moment. She quickly reintegrated the women's singing voices back into the audio track. The lyrics, on the surface, were simple, almost trivial. They sang about the sun on their backs, The weight of the pestle, the stiffness of the cassava. The kind of song you sing to make hard work feel lighter. But Althea wasn't listening to the literal meaning anymore. She was listening to the music of the words themselves. Kongo is a tonal language. This is crucial. The pitch at which a word is spoken can completely change its meaning. A single syllable, spoken high or low, can signify two entirely different things. Althea began to plot the melody of the song on a graph, charting the tonal ups and downs of the words as the women sang them. She stripped the lyrics away, leaving only the pure, raw tonal contour of the melody. Then she opened another database, this one filled with Kongo proverbs and their traditional tonal patterns. She compared the shape of her graph, the melody from the song, to the known tonal patterns of classic proverbs. Her breath caught in her throat. The melody of the women's song, when reduced to its tonal shape, perfectly matched the rising and falling pattern of a specific Kongo proverb, Enkalo Wenga Kanga Ensangu. Roughly translated, it means, a wise chief ties up news securely. In essence, a message about discretion, about keeping secrets. She sat back in her chair, breathless. The quiet hum of her computer, the only sound in the room. It all clicked into place. She wasn't just listening to a work song. She was eavesdropping on a conversation held nearly 100 years ago. It was a layered, sophisticated, and utterly brilliant act of communication. The pounding rhythm, the enkalo, provided the context, like a subject line in an email. Attention, important message. The tonal melody of the sung words, hidden within a seemingly innocuous song, carried the actual content, delivered through a proverb about secrecy and wisdom. And the literal lyrics, the words about pounding cassava, they were a decoy, a perfect camouflage, designed to be heard but not understood by the uninitiated, by the colonial overseers who recorded it. The women weren't just working. They were performing a sonic encryption. They were speaking in code, in plain sight, using the very tools of their labor and the structure of their language. The drum language hadn't died when the drums were banned. It hadn't vanished at all. It had simply translated itself, transposing its complex grammar and syntax into new instruments, the rhythm of work and the melody of song. The colonizers, in their quest to document what they considered simple, dying folklore, had accidentally preserved a living, breathing language of resistance. In the sterile quiet of that university lab, a secret, a century old, finally broke its silence, not with a defiant bang, but through the patient, careful listening of a descendant who knew how to hear the spaces between the notes. Althea spent the next few months completely obsessed. She dove headfirst into the archives, armed with this new analytical framework. She started applying it to everything she could find. Recordings of children's clapping games, the rhythmic chants of weavers at their looms, even the percussive clang of blacksmiths' hammers. She separated each recording into its three potential layers: the instrumental rhythm, the tonal melody of any speech or song, and the literal, surface-level lyrics. And the patterns started emerging everywhere. She found a recording of blacksmiths hammering metal. To an outsider, it was just the sound of a forge. But Althea isolated the rhythm of the hammers. She then analyzed the grunts and calls of the smiths, plotting their tonal melody. The rhythm and melody combined matched the structure for the proverb. Nosy keel, Nanzila danger is on the road. It was a warning. She analyzed a children's clapping game. The rhythmic pattern of the claps mapped perfectly onto the drumming structure for gathering or meeting. The song they sang, a simple nursery rhyme about a jumping frog, had a tonal melody that corresponded to a proverb about time and place. It was a coded instruction for a secret assembly. The sheer genius of it left her in awe. This wasn't a fixed cipher, where one sound always meant one thing. It was far more dynamic. It was a linguistic and musical principle. It leveraged the inherent structures that already existed within the Kongo culture, the tonality of their language and their mastery of polyrhythm, to create a parallel channel of communication. To an outsider, an overseer, a missionary, or an ethnography, it all just sounded like Africa. The rhythmic sounds of daily life, the music of a people. But to an insider, someone fluent in the language, the proverbs, the cultural context, it was a clear and precise stream of information. Danger, meeting, secrecy, news, all flowing invisibly beneath the surface of the mundane. The drums had never been the language itself. They were just the broadcast system. The most powerful and efficient one, yes, but just one of many possible vessels. When that system was taken away, the principle, the language itself, simply found other channels. The pestle, the hammer, the clapping hands, the human voice. Dr. Mensah realized she wasn't studying dead signals from a forgotten past. She was decoding a living, adaptive language of survival that had been spoken in plain hearing for over a century. A language hidden in the last place anyone thought to look. Everywhere, Dr. Mensah's breakthrough wasn't just a discovery. It was the opening of a floodgate. Realizing the massive implications of what she had found, she quickly assembled a dream team. Imagine this scene: a brilliant musicologist, an expert historian specializing in Central Africa, and a man named Tata Nzuzi. He was a native Kongo speaker, a cultural elder flown in all the way from Kinshasa, the capital of the Democratic Republic of Congo. His presence was crucial. Together, this diverse team delved into the archives, seeking out the rarest and most puzzling recordings. These weren't your everyday musical performances. They were labeled with intriguing but vague descriptions like narrative drumming or epic performance. Recorded in the early 1900s, they were a direct link to the past, captured from the few remaining master drummers of that era. These drummers, fearing the loss of their art, had played in secret for the handful of ethnographies they trusted. Out of all these historical artifacts, one recording in particular seemed to call to them. It was logged simply a story of the hunter and the thunderbird. An epic 22 minutes long, featuring just a single drummer on what sounded like a large, hollow log drum. Now, if you or I were to listen to it, it would sound like a mesmerizing but completely abstract tapestry of sound. You'd hear intricate rolls, sharp slaps, pregnant pauses, and strange tones made by the drummer pressing their heel onto the drum skin to change the pitch. It's beautiful, but what does it mean? The notes from the original ethnography who recorded it weren't much help. They were sparse, almost dismissive. Drummer says this tells a long story, meaning unclear, for over a century. That's what it remained. A beautiful, complex, but ultimately unintelligible piece of sound. A mystery locked away on a fragile recording. That is, until the team gathered in a quiet listening room and played it for the one person who might hold the key. They played the full 22-minute recording for Tata Nzuzi. As the sounds filled the room, he sat completely motionless, his eyes closed. His head was tilted slightly, a small frown of deep, intense concentration etched on his face. He wasn't just hearing, he was listening with his entire being. The intricate rhythms washed over him, sounds that had been silent for generations. When the final beat faded, the silence in the room was heavy. Tata Nzuzi didn't speak for a long time. The other researchers waited, holding their breath. Finally, he opened his eyes, and his voice, when he spoke, was thick with emotion. He looked at them and said, "It is not unclear. It is perfectly clear." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "But you cannot hear it with ears that only know words. This was the turning point. Tata and Zuzi began to explain. The drummer, he said, wasn't using some simple pre-arranged code, like a form of Morse code with drum beats representing letters or words. It was infinitely more sophisticated. The drummer was using the instrument to speak the story directly. He was mimicking the exact tonal patterns and rhythmic cadences of the spoken Kongo narrative tradition. The drum wasn't just accompanying a story. The drum was the story. Listen here, Tata Nzuzi said, his energy rising. He rewound the recording to a specific section. He played it for them. A rapid, high-pitched roll, pa-car-car-car-car-car-car-car, followed by two deep, resonant and spaced-out booms. Boom, boom. He stopped the recording. You hear that? He asked. The roll, high and tight. That is the sound of the hunter running through thin brush, the branches snapping against him. The two deep booms. That is his heart, startled by something in the forest. It was a revelation. The sounds weren't just abstract music. They were sonic paintings, conveying action and emotion. He played another section. This one was a series of high, sharp, isolated sounds. Tack, tack, tack. That is not a bird call, Tata Zuzi explained, his hands moving in the air as if conducting the invisible sounds. That is the drummer speaking the word tala, which means look, repeated in alarm. The drum is literally saying the words. What followed was months of intense, painstaking work. The team's process was meticulous. They would play a short segment of the recording, maybe just a minute long. Tata Nzuzi would listen, and then he would speak in his native tongue. The line of the narrative that the drum was saying. The musicologist on the team would be furiously taking notes, mapping the correlations. They started to see the patterns emerge. The drum's pitch corresponded to the tonal nature of the Kongo language, where the pitch of a vowel can change a word's meaning. A high tone on the drum might represent a word with a high-toned vowel, a low tone for a low-toned vowel. The rhythm was just as important. Staccato, punchy rhythms often represented quick verbs or actions. Long, flowing legato rolls were used for descriptive passages, painting a picture of a landscape or a character's thoughts. They quickly realized they weren't decoding a simple code. They were translating. They were moving from one dialect of the Kongo language to another, from spoken Kongo to drummed Kongo. And what a story it was. The 22-minute recording wasn't just a simple folktale. It was a complete, complex narrative. It told the story of a hunter who has a powerful encounter with a mystical thunderbird. Filled with arrogance, the hunter makes a foolish boast. This leads him into a series of difficult trials that test his spirit and his strength. In the end, he returns to his village, not as a hero, but as a humbled man who has learned a profound lesson. The story had everything: compelling character development, genuine suspense, and a powerful moral. This wasn't just a message, it was literature. Imagine looking at a whiteboard in their research lab. It's covered from top to bottom in dense, color-coded notes. There are lines and arrows connecting Kongo words to specific drum notation symbols they've created. It looks like the blueprint for an entire language. They found that the drum had a vocabulary of bass rhythms for common nouns specific, recognizable pattern for man, another for forest, another for river. It even had techniques for verb conjugation. A sharp slap at the end of a rhythmic phrase could indicate the past tense. A buzzing roll could signify a continuous, ongoing action. Even silence had meaning. The length of a pause between rhythmic phrases was used like punctuation in a written text, indicating the end of a sentence, a paragraph, or a change of scene in the story. What was once seen as an abstract piece of art, a beautiful but meaningless soundscape, had revealed itself to be a detailed novel. It had just been waiting for over a century for a reader who knew how to read the original tongue. This discovery didn't just add a new chapter to our understanding of music, it completely shattered previous academic assumptions. For decades, scholars had debated the complexity of so-called talking drums. The common consensus, especially in Western academia, was that they were primitive signaling systems. People imagined them being used for simple, repetitive messages, like the chief is coming or danger. This research proved how wrong that was. It demonstrated that these drums were instruments capable of holding and transmitting the full breadth of human experience. They could convey history, law, philosophy, and epic poetry. The drum wasn't a telegraph, it was a bard. It was a library. It was a historian. And the reason this profound complexity had been missed for so long was that everyone was looking for the wrong thing. They were looking for a simple, one-to-one code, a Rosetta Stone that would translate rhythm A into word B. But the key wasn't a code. The key was fluency. To understand the drum, you had to first understand the source language it was speaking. You had to know the narrative conventions, the poetry, the tonal cadence of the spoken word. The master drummers of the past weren't just sending signals. They were speaking with breathtaking eloquence and nuance, in a medium of stretched animal hide and carved wood. As the team reached the end of their translation, they played the final moments of the recording one last time. The story of the hunter concluded with a slow, solemn, descending pattern of tones. It was a sound of resolution, of wisdom gained through hardship. In the quiet of the listening room, Tatanzuzi listened, his eyes closed once more. A single tear escaped and traced a slow path down his weathered cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of profound connection, of memory unearthed. He turned to the team, a soft, remembering smile on his lips. "My grandfather could speak like this," he whispered. "I heard it once, when I was very small, before it was forbidden. I had forgotten the sound." He tapped his chest lightly. "But my bones remembered." It was a legacy, not lost, but merely dormant, waiting for the right moment and the right ears to be heard once again. After all their hard work, the team reached a profound and humbling realization. They had mapped the syntax of the drum language. They had translated its epic tales. They could now explain, in precise academic terms, exactly how it worked, its tonal correlations, its rhythmic grammar, its narrative structures. They were ready to publish papers, create interactive databases, and give lectures demonstrating this incredibly sophisticated communication system. But, as Dr. Althea Mensah sat with Tata Nzuzi after a long day of transcribing, a lingering question surfaced. She looked at the old man, the quiet university common room bathed in the late afternoon sun. "We can explain the mechanism, Tata," she began, "but could we ever truly use it? Could I, with all my graphs and notes, send a message that a villager from that time would actually understand?" Tata Nzuzi smiled, a slow, deep smile that reached his eyes. He poured her more tea, his movements gentle and deliberate. "No, my daughter," he said softly. "And that is the point. You have the key, but you do not have the lock. The lock is the life." He then explained what he meant. The drum rhythm for Hunter, he said, wasn't just a sound pattern. It was the memory of the smell of early morning forest dew. It was the feel of a bowstring's tension against your fingers. It was the collective respect the entire village held for that vital role. The proverb they had decoded, the one about the wise chief tying up news, wasn't just a clever phrase. It was the shared understanding of 100 historical moments where discretion and secrecy had saved the entire community. The code wasn't just in the rhythm alone. The rhythm was merely the trigger. The message itself lived in a vast, shared library of cultural experience. It was made of the jokes, the tragedies, the seasonal routines, the unspoken rules of etiquette, everything that every member of the community carried with them from birth. A soldier could hear the same drum you just decoded. Tata Nzuzi continued, his hands illustrating his point. He could even write down the beats, note for note. But what would he hear? A nice rhythm, just music. He would miss the scent of the forest in the hunter beat. He would not feel the weight of history in the chief proverb. The message would pass straight through his ears and find absolutely nothing to connect to. It would be like shouting into a canyon with no walls. There would be no echo. This was the absolute genius and the ultimate security of the system. It wasn't designed to be secret from a technical standpoint. It was designed to be completely meaningless to outsiders. Its encryption wasn't mathematical, it was cultural. To break the code, you wouldn't need a cipher book or a supercomputer. You would need to live an entire lifetime in that village. You'd need to speak the language in your dreams, feel the community's joys and fears as if they were your own. In short, you would need to become one of them. No foreign power, no matter how many linguists or cryptographers it employed, could ever do that at scale. The code was unbreakable because it wasn't a code at all, it was a shared state of being. Let's just pause for a moment and let that sink in. This understanding settles like dust in a sunbeam. The greatest security wasn't obscurity, but an incredible depth of context. This very principle was what had allowed the drum language to survive the colonial ban. When the authorities officially silenced the drums, they only took away the key. The lock, that deep, shared cultural life, remained intact. So, the people simply found new keys. They used the rhythmic pounding of a pestle grinding grain. They used the percussive thud of an axe splitting wood. They even used the clapping games of their children. The trigger changed, but the underlying mechanism of understanding that deep, contextual echo stayed exactly the same. The modern scholars, for all their sophisticated technology, found themselves in the exact same position as those frustrated colonial officers from a century ago. They could dissect the trigger, analyze the key down to its finest detail. But they could never access the living, breathing lock. They were studying the fossil of a bird's song, not the feeling of the forest that song once filled. This realization didn't diminish their work, as Tata Nzuzi assured them. In fact, it elevated it. He leaned forward, placing his hand gently over Dr. Mentz's notebook, which was filled with her technical transcriptions and graphs. It was a gesture of blessing, a connection between two different kinds of knowledge. "You are not breaking a code," he said. "You are building a bridge to a shore you can never fully stand on. You are proving that what they dismissed as noise was, in fact, an entire world. That is a different kind of victory. It is a victory of witness." Inspired by this, the team's final publication was titled something very different from what they had first imagined. It wasn't called the Kongo Drum Cipher. Instead, it was the Kongo Sonic Epistemology, vibration as culturally contextualized knowledge. Its core argument was that the drums were never just a communication tool. They were a manifestation of a whole communication universe, a way of knowing and being that was completely inextricable from Kongo life itself. The papers were celebrated in academic circles, winning awards and acclaim. But for Althea Mensa, the greatest reward came later. It was the moment she played a clean digital copy of the Hunter and the Thunderbird drum epic for Tata Nzuzi's extended family in a modern living room in Kinshasa. As the ancient sounds filled the room, the older members of the family began to nod, some even whispering along with the story that Tata Nzuzi had helped them translate. And the younger members, teenagers who had never heard such a thing in their lives, leaned forward, completely captivated by the sound. The lock, though worn by time, still turned. The echo, though faint, still resonated. The unbreakable code was, in the end, simply belonging. And while the specific world that created it might be gone, its echo in scholarship, in family memory, and in the persistent, complex rhythms of Kongo music today proved that some messages, when they are encoded deeply enough in the human spirit, never truly stop being sent. Welcome back, under the baobab. The embers of our fire are deep red now, holding the day's heat like a secret. The story we have traced tonight, from the coded fields of rebellion to the scholarly quiet of a modern lab, was not just a story about drums. It was a story about voice, and how a people, when one form of their voice is threatened, will grow another, not from their throats, but from the very rhythm of their survival. We began with a rhythm hidden in the swing of a machete, a map to freedom beaten out on tired thighs. We saw a great tree give its body to become a villager's memory, a hollow that held echoes of every laugh and lament. We felt the cold shadow of a law that tried to outlaw vibration itself, and we marveled as the voice went underground, speaking through the pounding of yam and the play of children. Finally, we listened with scholars as they discovered that the code was a whole way of life. Speaking in a tongue of tone and time, the whispering drums of Kongo were never just drums. They were the nervous system of a culture, the pulse of a community across distance and through time. When that system was attacked, it did not die, it decentralized. It proved that the true instrument was not the hide and wood, but the listening, collective heart. The message was not in the sound, but in the shared silence that understood it. Today, the great mother drums are mostly museum pieces. The networks of drum messages are quiet, but the principle they embodied is not gone. Listen, it is in the complex, joyful rhythms of Suku's music that make a whole city move as one. It is in the call and response of a church congregation, a shared breath of faith. It is in the particular cadence a mother uses to call her children home, a rhythm they alone recognize as theirs. The voice changed its instrument, but it never lost its song. Let's take a final, soft pause. The night is deep and full. The baobab stands, a silent drummer against the stars. Its own ancient rhythms measured in the slow growth of roots and the patient turn of seasons. We have sat together in this long listening. We have followed the path of a beat from rebellion to memory, from prohibition to rediscovery. We have learned that to try and silence a people as true voice is to try and silence their heartbeat, only makes them more inventive in finding ways to be heard. The most powerful resistance is not always a shout. Sometimes it is a rhythm passed from hand to hand, from mortar to mortar, from generation to generation, saying, simply and forever, we are here, we remember, we speak. The fire is now just a glow, a memory of warmth. The story is told. You are under baobab skies.